Didn't you just have a sheet on tetanus? Didn't you have a sheet for me on tetanus? Or no?
I didn't send it to you.
No, I thought, it was your own. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, it's recording. Dr. Bob doesn't know. It's still recording. He left the room. I can say whatever I want. The question is, will any of this get on the podcast? What should I say? I'm always waiting. Always waiting. What's going on, everybody? You listening to this? Interesting? Huh? He's coming back. Shh. Oh, hey. How are you? How you doing?
Good.
We're just all waiting here patiently. That's fine.
Okay. Would you put your cell phone down? Why are you texting during the podcast?
Because you're about to talk about an infectious disease, and it's going to be a boring episode. Just kidding, guys. It's going to be very exciting.
This is going to be super exciting. Okay, well, I guess I'll welcome us in then, I guess.
I'm seriously
if you're
getting
ready.
hungry.
Yeah? Do you need a snack? I have snacks.
No, I can't have any snacks.
Oh, bone broth. Yeah, okay. All right,
Yes.
well, okay, I'll...
When you open the door for somebody else.
Welcome, everybody, to the Vaccine Conversation with Melissa and Dr. Bob. It's good to be back for this super exciting... Why do you think it's not
Where
good to
did
be
you
back?
go?
It's going to be back on the next episode.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, are we rolling over there?
We're rolling.
Okay. See, you looked over there and then I was freaking out. So anyway, today's exciting episode is all about tetanus. Tetanus, the disease. We're going to do a disease episode. Melissa needs a break from her
My social issues.
passionate talking, and but yeah, we're trying to make our way through disease by disease, and we felt tetanus was in the news recently, so I kind of felt that it would be good to address it. And,
Well, anyway, we want to cover all of the diseases on the childhood schedule. Anyway.
Eventually. So, but I don't know, any sort of interesting tidbits you wanted to chat about before we jump into tetanus? Or
Not if we want to get through to anything else after that. We should go right into tetanus.
All right. Well, let's jump right in, you guys. So, tetanus. Tetanus, gosh, where to even start? Tetanus is a bacteria. Clostridium tetani is the name of it. It's a bacterial infection, and it's in the same family as the bacteria, I think, that cause gangrene. The same bacteria that what causes what else? I forget what else. But C. diff. You guys have heard of C. diff colitis, Clostridium colitis. That's when you get too many antibiotics and you get really bad intestinal infection. C. diff is in the same family. So tetanus is a bacteria, and it's basically in soil, and it's in manure. Farm animal feces, manure, and it's also can live sometimes in the mouth and the intestines of animals, and it basically kind of lives there. And it's never contagious from person to person. Just so you know, so you can't catch tetanus from someone who has tetanus. And the bacteria is actually itself is harmless. It doesn't actually do anything bad to you. What happens is if tetanus bacteria gets introduced into your body, into a part of your body that doesn't have any oxygen, so basically like a deep, dirty wound, and the bacteria get down in there with some dirt, and then the wound kind of closes off, so there's no oxygen in there. The tetanus will start to grow and multiply, and then create like a little tetanus infection down in your wound. But that's still harmless because that doesn't cause anything bad. What happens is the tetanus bacteria generates a toxin and secretes this toxin, and the toxin is what's dangerous. The toxin basically goes through your bloodstream and finds nerves, and basically inactivates nerves in your body. And then that's the disease that we call tetanus. That's when you've gotten tetanus and you're sick with it. And it essentially takes about a week for that process to happen from a wound. It can happen quicker, like 3 days. It can also happen take a longer, like 3 weeks. Sometimes it can be a delayed response, but for the most part, you'll usually start feeling the symptoms of your nerves not working basically within about 7 days of getting tetanus. I was talking to a friend, and she was on a walk with her. She's a doctor. She's on a walk with her family, and her kid like stepped on a rusty nail on the walk, and when they got home from the walk, the kid started complaining that his jaw was hurting. Because the jaw nerves and muscles are one of the first nerves that tetanus toxin will get to. So you'll have what's called lock jaw. You can't open your jaw to chew. And her kid's jaw started hurting after the walk. And so she freaked out, and they went to the ER, and they kind of got tetanus treatments, got like a tetanus treatment we'll talk about later. And she's telling me a story, and I was like, I guess I didn't have the heart to tell her that was way too soon, and that it couldn't have been the actual tetanus causing that. But yeah, that's where the old term lockjaw comes from, because that could be the first nerve affected. A few things just to kind of point out. I mean, even though wounds are one of the main places you'll get tetanus, it can also happen if you from getting a burn. Just the dead tissue from a burn can be where tetanus will multiply if tetanus was like got in you
exposed
from the burn.
wound.
But I mean, most people who get burned by something, there's not going to be tetanus there because it wasn't like a dirty, rusty, manure filled thing. But sometimes it's from burns. Very rarely, people can get tetanus germs into their body just through like a surgery or a dental procedure. Bites from an animal, like if the animal has tetanus in their mouth and their saliva, or if you get a really bad crush wound where you get kind of dead tissue down inside you. Just very rarely, sometimes tetanus will kind of get into your body in other ways besides a wound, and it will multiply and cause a tetanus infection. But I think for the most part, those are very kind of sudden and unexplained, and kind of really rare. For the most part, it's deep, dirty wounds. Let me tell you what it's not. It's not simple, clean cut that's straight and not very deep. They flush it out. The ER cleans it out, and you get 3 stitches. That's not a tetanus risk. You step on something and it pokes, a little bit into you and you bleed a little bit. That's not a tetanus risk. It's really got to be a deep, dirty wound where dirt, soil, especially soil from around a farm where there's a lot of manure, gets basically punctured deeply into your body and closed off so you can't flush it all out. That's where tetanus is going to happen.
Can I just interject and say?
Interject anytime you want, because I'm happy to take questions from the audience.
You talk with your hands a lot.
I do.
Like a lot.
Yeah.
Like for a non-Italian, you talk with your hands a lot. Right. And it was funny because I realized we both do that. Yeah. But I do it because I have a genetic predisposition to do it. I'm wondering what your excuse is. You don't see guys that talk with their hands a lot. And I realize at the podcast, because that's all I can see of you is like from just your arms up, like that I see your arms. And as you're explaining this tetanus stuff, you're using your hands like a lot. Did you notice that? You notice that about yourself?
I notice it now. Yeah.
You've never thought about that before?
I have not.
Oh my God. Are you serious?
No, but when I'm on them, as I go with my hands, no, you're right.
He had both of his hands out just to say I was right.
Okay. No, but when I watch old interviews of me on TV, I totally talk with my hands. Like the news reporters is like this, sitting at the desk, goes, "Well, Dr. Bob, tell me about this," and I'll be like, "Well, Joe, let me tell you all about what I'm saying." So I've tried to be conscious of that, but
that is so
I felt like
funny.
This was a safe place, in our podcast studio where I could
be yourself,
be myself, and be accepted,
right,
and talk with my hands anyway. So, oh wow.
I just wanted to tell you that.
Yeah. So anyway, that was not like a tetanus question. Then that was just an observation.
Well, if you were talking about wounds on the hands and the arms, and so it was like a lot of hand action happening, and I realized.
So we want wounds to bleed. If I'm going to put my hand right here, if wounds bleed a lot, then that helps flush out infection, right? And I also want people to know it's not like tetanus is just in soil everywhere all the time. It's not like it's in every single piece of dirt or rust or whatever. We don't have tetanus in most areas of the country. It's just especially farms, manure, certain places. And where rust comes into play is it's not that tetanus necessarily loves to live on rust. It's that if you get something rusty and dirty that also has tetanus on it from the dirt, and that gets impaled into you and that rust kind of breaks off, the rust helps deprive the area of oxygen so that then the tetanus can thrive even more and grow. So that's kind of where the rust comes into play. But
because I've heard, oxygen, if your wound has had exposure to oxygen, then isn't that typically
it
a
kills
sign that
off
it's
the
killing
tetanus.
off? Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I can't tell you how many ER call or, after hours calls I get, someone's like, oh my gosh, my kid just, scraped himself. Or cut himself, and I'm worried about tetanus because I think parents have the misconception tetanus is everywhere. It's on every surface. It's on every dirty surface. It's not. And I think to kind of speak to how rare tetanus really is and how it's not in most places is just kind of looking at the numbers. I have some data basically Basically, in our country every year, we have about 30 to 50 cases of tetanus reported nationwide. 30 to 50.
Yeah, which is very, very low.
We used to, sometimes we've had 100, many years ago, but 30 to 50 cases a year. When we look at kids, young children under 5, we usually don't have any cases in a given year, kids under 5, because they're not at as high a risk of deep and dirty wounds. Sometimes we have one case in a kid under 5, but it's almost unheard of under 5. Older kids and teens, we have about 3 to 5 cases reported every year in our whole country. So I think it's important for people to kind of take that into perspective. The statistical risk that your child or your teen is going to catch tetanus is maybe 5 in however many millions of kids we have living in that age group. It's probably 40, 50 million kids in that age range. So it's like 1 in 10 million chance that your kid's going to be a tetanus statistic as far as catching tetanus. And thankfully it's so rare. I mean, where we live in there was just a case. Actually, it was up in Oregon. I think this kid, got a really bad head injury and then he got tetanus. Was in the ICU for 2 months. Very serious. Okay, so wound care is critical. You got to flush out wounds. You got to clean them. Don't just kiss it to make it better, flush it out, clean it. I'll be honest, I don't know what the best cleaning method is. I mean, some people say just soap and water. Some people say, half strength peroxide. Some people, will do betadine. Again, some people do some more natural stuff. But however you want to clean your wound, it's really critical.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for letting me clean my wound the way that I so feel fit.
So how are you going to know if your kid actually gets tetanus and catches tetanus? And actually, I was hoping you would say something because I needed to look something up really quick as I
nope.
No, okay.
I'm good.
Well, we'll just have to pause and edit this problem. Where is it? I'm wondering if blah blah blah.
Nope.
Okay, now we'll just have to edit this out. Because there's 2 kinds of tetanus. I wanted people to. Oh yeah. Okay. Here we go. Woo, found it. Okay. Anyway, so there was no awkward pause in the podcast just now. We're just going to edit this out. So there's 2 kinds of tetanus. There's local and generalized. So local tetanus is basically where the tetanus doesn't spread throughout your body. It just infects the nerves and the muscles near the wound. Are you literally working on the next podcast?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay. See, I keep expecting you're going to ask these interesting questions, these thoughtful questions.
There's nothing interesting about tetanus.
Tell me, Dr. Bob, tell me more about that. Or what?
Tell us more about tetanus.
Okay, so you can
the
just
2 different
work on,
types. I want to learn about the 2 different types. Go ahead.
You keep working on the next podcast, the article that I already read and took notes on.
I had to print it out late last night because I had to get it back on my.
Had all morning.
Do you know? Oh, really? Did I? I literally wake up with the children. I cuddled Serenity for 30 minutes today in the morning because that's what I love to do in the morning.
Yeah,
and I won't sacrifice that, not even for the podcast. Okay. And I don't think anybody out there would want me to. So.
Please rate and review.
Only review Dr. Bob.
Okay. Okay, so local tetanus again. So just at the place of injury, the nerves and the muscles will stop working, and they'll start the muscles will contract and stiffen up, and you're not going to be able to move your muscles because they'll be too tight, and that can actually last several weeks. Very, very painful, but then the muscles will gradually relax as the tetanus toxin kind of leaves the nerve endings, and the muscles relax and start working again. So that's local tetanus. The second type is generalized tetanus, and that's basically where the tetanus kind of goes through your bloodstream and through your body, and then will start affecting all kinds of different nerves. It spreads to the spinal cord and the brain and other parts of the body. So essentially, nerves anywhere can stop working. The nerves that help control breathing can stop working. You might actually have to go on a ventilator during this time. You might have to be sedated because lots of muscles are contracting and stiffening up. Very, very painful. It's not a good disease. There's no doubt. I mean, we've told you some diseases are mostly harmless for most people. This is a really, really terrible disease. And the fatality rate, if I'm remembering correctly, is something like 11%. 11% of people will actually pass away because it just stops muscles and nerves from working too much. So you get a wound, you go to the ER, it gets flushed out, and you think you're fine. So if you're not vaccinated, you've never had any tetanus vaccines. We give tetanus vaccine at 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, 18 months, 5 years, and 12 years because it's mixed into the DTaP vaccine. It's part of the triple combo DTaP vaccine. So that's when we give tetanus vaccines. So interestingly, babies don't need tetanus protection because babies don't catch tetanus in the United States. So it's not so much that babies need a tetanus shot, it's that it's part of the whooping cough vaccine. So it's kind of by default, we give it to everybody. So if you've never had these vaccines and you get a really, really deep, terrible wound that really does look high risk, and you're going to the ER, there's actually a shot you can get. It's called tetanus immune globulin, TIG. And you can get that shot and it immediately will neutralize tetanus toxins that are being generated in your wound in the weeks to come, so you actually won't develop tetanus. So it's a great treatment. So if you are an unvaccinated family, you're not totally at the mercy of tetanus. There is a preventive treatment at the time of injury. Getting your first actual tetanus vaccine at the time of injury doesn't do you much good. It's really the tetanus immune globulin that would do you good.
Excellent point, Dr. Bob.
Oh my God. Thank you, Melissa. I must say, I am impressed that you can write and circle and listen to me at the same time. And
I'm not listening to you.
Oh, God. Okay, well, what was the point I just made?
I was waiting for a lull.
What point did I just make?
You made the point that you should not, at the time of the injury, get your first dose of a tetanus vaccine. It won't do much good. You should get the immunoglobulin instead.
See? How do you do that? I can't.
I'm exceptionally educated. Okay. Must I remind you?
Okay, right. Okay, so that'll protect you. And obviously, I think if you've had the tetanus shots beforehand, 2 or 3 doses. So there are 6 doses of tetanus on the schedule, but that's only because we need 6 doses of whooping cough. If you only look at tetanus by itself, you only need 3 doses of tetanus vaccine to mount a really high level of antibody response.
Would it stay that way consistently for the rest of your life?
No, it could wear off maybe after like 10, 15 years.
So you need
you get
3 doses initially to have a high level that you would have to booster every 10 years, according to the theories.
Right. But my thought is if you get the initial 3 doses, and you have that pre-immunity response in your body, but you don't stay up with your boosters, ask your doctor about it. But if you miss out on that 10-year booster window, say 20 years have gone by, and you get a terrible wound, now you're worried about tetanus. Since you already had 3 tetanus shots as a child, if you get the tetanus booster at the time of injury, it's probably going to help. It'll like mount a quick antibody response, and it'll probably help fight off tetanus from that wound. So you probably don't need a tetanus immune globulin if you've already been pre-vaccinated many years ago, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, but why wouldn't you wouldn't there be a less risk to have immunoglobulin instead?
Great question, Melissa. I'm glad you asked because I was going to say something about it and I totally forgot. The problem with tetanus immune globulin is it's a blood product. It's actually made from donated
So
blood
say the
units.
immune globulin?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, everyone who donates their blood, to the Red Cross and the hospitals and everything, they filter out that blood and they take out things to use for other purposes. And one of the things they do is they filter out all the tetanus antibodies that you, as a vaccinated human, have in that blood unit. And they take all the tetanus antibodies out of 10 other donated blood units from other people, and they combine them into a vial, and they store it and they freeze it and they process it and they disinfect it. So there's no,
but there's always that risk of
bad
contamination.
diseases in it. Yeah, but there is risk of human blood to human blood contamination. So there is a downside to immune globulin shots because that's where they come from.
I think I call it immunoglobulin first. Immune globulin. I mean, I always write it as IG, so I never have to say it.
Yeah. But it's tetanus immune globulin.
Okay.
Is the official medical terminology.
Thank you, Dr. Bob.
You're welcome, Melissa. Thank you for that.
Please continue.
Fascinating question. Okay, so I mean, what else about tetanus? I mean, if you catch tetanus, like I said, and it's really severe, you're in an ICU, people, for weeks while it wears off. The other problem is, okay, so if you get tetanus and you get lockjaw, all right, and you get a bad wound and a week later you get lockjaw. Now you're worried, oh my gosh, my kid has tetanus. You rush to the ER. They can give you tetanus immune globulin then, and it'll neutralize any toxin that's floating around in your system still. But any nerves that are already paralyzed will remain paralyzed because the tetanus immune globulin doesn't knock the toxin off of those nerve endings. So you're stuck with whatever degree of paralysis you have to that point, and then you might be in an ICU while that wears off. So that's can be still severe. So tetanus immune globulin might help you at that point, but not as much as getting it at the time of a severe injury. But again, please don't get tetanus immune globulin for routine, clean injuries that are not a tetanus risk because that's really not the standard of care. Okay, so I think that's all I can think about as far as the disease goes.
Excellent. Thank you for. Oh, is there more? Oh, do you still have to cover the vaccine too?
Yes, Melissa, we still have to
my
cover the
goodness.
vaccine.
You're
not done with your article
You
anyway.
talked about the vaccine already.
No, I didn't. So the vaccine, I told you when we give the vaccine, but
you said it was a combo vaccine.
Right. But you can also get a tetanus diphtheria vaccine, DT, just plain tetanus diphtheria without the whooping cough component if you want. And you would get, again, 3 doses of that, kind of at any age. There's no age where, we're kind of restricted to. So some of the downsides of the vaccine, and it's funny, I forgot to bring my vaccine book today.
The one time.
I know, the one time. No, but I remember it's all stored up in my brain here, in my doctor brain. There are potential serious reactions from the tetanus vaccine. And they're basically neurological reactions. Because tetanus is an infection that affects your nervous system, as with all vaccines, the possible side effects are things that can mimic the disease itself. So the tetanus vaccine can cause seizures, it can cause partial paralysis, it's actually fairly well known for causing like a temporary complete loss of function of the limb that you get injected in, either severe shooting pains going down the nerves of your arm called brachial neuritis, or severe neuropathy where the nerves just stop working in your arm, you can't move your arm for a while. Most people recover, don't worry. Some people don't. I saw a patient the other day, their grandpa had permanent disability in his arm from a tetanus shot for the rest of his life. Anyway, so you can have bad reactions. And in fact, the Institute of Medicine, what I'm trying to remember from the vaccine book, is they actually studied this on a real scientific level. And they actually did conclude that tetanus-containing vaccines medically and scientifically have been shown to, for sure, create a risk of neurological injury from the vaccine. That's not one of those like maybe reactions. It's like a solid reaction. So, so what are we looking in terms of numbers? We are looking at, this comes from NVIC, their tetanus page. Overall, ever since we started the vaccine injury compensation program, there have been almost 6,000 claims of injury from tetanus-containing vaccines in the vaccine injury compensation program, including 864 fatal reactions and 5,000 serious reactions where someone was hospitalized, permanently disabled from a tetanus vaccine. So that kind of gives you the numbers in the vaccine injury compensation program. As far as VAERS go, VAERS is the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System where we send, all the reactions, not just the compensated ones. There have been 182,000 reports of vaccine reactions to tetanus-containing vaccines. Over 60% of those reports were in children, 6 years and younger. When it comes to fatal reactions, there have been over 3,000 fatal reactions reported to VAERS after tetanus vaccine. And almost all of them were in kids under 6, almost all of those 3,000 fatal reactions. Some of the other most severe ones, again, include going into shock, seizures, encephalopathy, which is brain damage, paralysis, Guillain-Barré syndrome. And so for me, honestly, if a child's risk of having of dying from or of catching tetanus is maybe like 1 in 10 million. If you look at the actual data on how many cases we have in kids, 1 in 10 million risk of catching tetanus, and then about 10% of those will die. That risk honestly seems lower than the statistical risk that you'll have a severe neurological reaction from the actual vaccine. If we look at the VAERS data and how many people have had severe and even fatal reactions to the actual vaccine, it doesn't mean you shouldn't vaccinate. It just means this is kind of a risk-benefit analysis. When you have a disease that's virtually eradicated that we don't have anymore, and it's not eradicated because of the vaccine, because the vaccine doesn't work that way. This vaccine does not eradicate tetanus from our population because it has no action against the tetanus bacteria. The tetanus bacteria are always going to be here. We can't eradicate them. All the vaccine does is make you not get paralyzed if you have the wound. So it's not a public health measure. Understand that kind of that risk-benefit analysis. What else, Melissa? What else is there about tetanus?
You tell me, Dr. Bob.
You've
Listening with open ears.
You've been way more talkative on other disease. Well, let me ask you as a parent then. I always fall into that trap of asking you the parent question.
That's okay.
Let me ask you as an intelligent, confident,
informed
woman
parent.
who's informed about everything, who's a professional, and you're in college. Oh, do you have kids too? Okay,
I happen to have kids.
How do you view that decision when you feel like scientifically there's more potential for severe side effects from a vaccine than the disease poses, knowing there's no public health benefit to your kids getting this vaccine in this kind of case? I don't know. How do you kind of process that? I'm
more concerned with the fact that anytime somebody is in a potential need for a tetanus vaccine, of course, they always offer only Tdap instead of TD. I've actually had people that have messaged me, and I said, ask your doctor if you can get a TD shot instead, because you're going to at least eliminate the extra pertussis component. Now, while the medical establishment thinks that this is an added benefit because it continues to boost pertussis because they know it wanes so quickly, we also know that the pertussis component causes a lot more side effects, or can, and especially neurologically. So I'm a little more concerned with the fact that they push that vaccine so quickly on people, and they push the full 3 antigen version, where I would like there to be an option. Even TD, why isn't there just a tetanus?
Yeah, there used to be just a tetanus.
Yeah.
And
why isn't that available?
It.
It's like, why do we need another component for another disease in there?
We don't need diphtheria boosters because we don't have diphtheria in the United States.
Yeah, those are some of the things that I question when you think of as a parent. If I could have the most minimally invasive vaccine option if I had to, and you think I need to do this every 10 years to safeguard myself, if that's the route that you went, you would still want it to be the least invasive and the least reactive version. So I think that's a problem, is because not only are you not just getting tetanus, the minimum that you can get would be a double, and then the usual you're getting is a triple. So it's like that to me tips the scales, because then I really do look at how infrequently the chances are we don't live on a farm. We're not in that exposure. It's not something I've personally worried about where I've said to myself, I need to make sure, my kids go in.
Well, what about pre-vaccinating, though, with 3 doses of tetanus diphtheria vaccine, so your kids can run around and you get all kinds of scrapes and puncture wounds and
they can
injured without worry? I mean, does the possibility that your kid might be one of those 5 kids in America that's going to catch tetanus this year, does that concern you?
I think for me it does not, because the people I hear about getting tetanus are typically adults. Like when I hear cases, they tend to be adults. So it's and that having those 3 doses at the beginning would have worn off by the time you're an adult anyway.
Right.
There are a lot of things to weigh. Obviously, it's whatever anybody else feels comfortable with. I'm personally not very comfortable with the DTaP vaccine because I know what happened to my daughter, and and I know that my hospitalization as a child was after DTP vaccine as an infant. And so I think that I have a lot of discomfort with that vaccine kind of in general. And so if that's the only option to help give the hypothetical protection for the 1 in 10 million chance, to me, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. If there was a separate tetanus vaccine that I could get for a child every 10 years that was by itself, that you could give some kind of protection if I was in an environment where that seemed to be a legitimate risk, then I can see people choosing that, because I know some of these diseases, I'm not going to make light that every single disease we have a vaccine for is really just a super mild childhood illness. Of course, we know that there are several that are. But not all of them. I know that. I know that there are some diseases that are serious, and the risk once you catch them can be very serious. And that's exactly why you have to make this a cost-benefit analysis for each person based on how likely are you to be exposed to it, what age is your child, and what is their previous profile of reacting to vaccines or their family history of that. I mean, all that has to be factored in. Do I think that we should all just do everything the CDC says just in case because they make new ones, so we should just take them and take all the doses of them? I think that's ludicrous. I think that everybody's medical intervention process and treatment should be individualized for your child and your circumstance, your location, and everything like that. These should be informed decisions for that reason. And I would never just do what everybody's saying just because for that small risk. I want to do what's safest, for my child. But some of these diseases do have a risk. There is a risk. And if you think that you're one of those people who has a high risk of, maybe that one's worth it to you to get the 3 doses as in childhood.
Yeah. I've had patients who basically did not vaccinate with anything, but they live on a farm. Mm-hmm. And so they won't vaccinate for tetanus when their kid's a little baby, but they will vaccinate for tetanus maybe when their kid turns 5 or 6 or 8, and they'll give maybe 2 or 3 doses of tetanus diphtheria vaccine because they live on a farm and they want their kids to be able to run around and play in all the stables and stalls and roll around with the pigs, and get dirty and they worry. So that would maybe be one of the most logical places to.
But so back in farm life,
tetanus vaccine
in the 50s, when there was a lot more farm life around the country, how frequent was it then?
That is a fantastic question.
I have that in my book, actually. I mean, we're not talking about the tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of cases, right? I mean, it was not ever like that.
No, it was always a very small number.
So even in farm communities, and we had a lot more farming communities back in the 40s and 50s, obviously, across this nation than we do now. So even then, I mean, from what I remember going through, it wasn't like it was some, extremely frequent disease anyway.
Right. Exactly. Okay, well, cool. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bob. Thank you for bringing this excellent and informative information, get it? About infectious diseases that we need to learn about and know about. And this is very, very riveting. Riveting information.
I can tell you were riveted.
Yes.
Well, see, the challenge here is I've opened up the vaccine book on my.
Oh no! Don't sign off now. Sign off now.
I've opened up the vaccine book, like the written text on my iPad here because I want to share this information because we always tell people like how the vaccines are made. Melissa just put her head down. We tell people how the vaccines are made and what the ingredients are because people sort of they kind of want to know that. They do. Don't you guys want to know, people?
Well, look, that's the benefit of you having this in a written form.
I know,
is that people can have this book and have it accessible.
Anyway, so it's right here. So I don't have to edit this. Okay. So here it is. Okay. So they basically, scientists got, diphtheria bacteria and they got tetanus bacteria just from, many, many decades ago. And they basically keep those bacteria alive, like in petri dishes and like, test tubes or petri dishes in laboratories. And they're just living there, and the bacteria are constantly producing their toxins, just secreting their toxins. And so they then kind of scoop a bunch of that out of that little vat or whatever it is, and they filter out the toxins. So they only have the tetanus toxin in the little solution, and they purify it using formaldehyde. They have to kind of like mix formaldehyde in, so it kills off any remaining tetanus germs. They don't want any live tetanus germs to be in there. Excuse me. Then if they're making the DTaP vaccine with pertussis, then they mix it into the pertussis. But if they're not, then they just leave it basically separate diphtheria and tetanus toxins only. Excuse me. Then they combine it with aluminum. They have to put aluminum with it, so the aluminum helps you launch a better immune response. All right. Otherwise, the vaccine won't work very well. And so what's actually in the final solution? The final tetanus diphtheria vaccines have the germ toxins, the aluminum, saline, formaldehyde. And, one little drawback, tiny little drawback, is the tetanus diphtheria vaccines, they have a tiny, I can really stress, tiny little bit of mercury. They filter it all out. They clean it all out. They filter it so it's barely there. It's like less than even 1 microgram. So I truly feel like it is insignificant. But don't let that mercury scare you. Like vaccines used to have 25 micrograms of mercury. That's when it was way too much and it was not safe. This is like less than 1 microgram of mercury, even less than 0.3 micrograms of mercury. And I think some companies have started making it actually completely mercury free, but I haven't verified that. Anyway, so
okay, what page was that on? That they can check that out now. That people that have your book, can you let us know what page that is, Dr. Bob?
Everyone has the book. That's
well,
important.
They should have it. Anyway, it's a good.
So that was tetanus.
Wait, no,
what's in the tetanus chapter?
But what page
like
specifically?
65, 64. So,
all right.
That's my written manuscript. It's not the book manuscript.
Okay,
anyway.
So the tetanus chapter in the vaccine. Yes. Is that the name of the vaccine book?
Yeah. So now I feel complete because now if I had left that off, I'd be like, oh no, I didn't.
But we could have a tetanus part 2. We could do this all day.
So that was tetanus. I wonder how long that was. That was way too long for a disease that barely exists, and I'm just going to keep talking about it.
Okay, and thank you guys for listening to the Vaccine Conversation. Check us out next time for all of our interesting topics that we're covering on the greater vaccine debate. Make sure you check out Immunity Education Group Facebook page and our website, immunityeducationgroup.org. And we totally appreciate you guys. Oh, also, there is a donate button on the IEG website. We don't mention this every episode because I really hate when people advertise needing donations. Unfortunately, nobody's getting paid here, and there are expenses that have to happen in order for us to do this podcast and to continue to do our educational outreach, which we do because we love, but of course it's not sustainable forever. So if you do feel there's value here, please, we would totally appreciate being able to donate to IEG. And we love you guys, and thank you for listening. We'll say bye? Say bye. No, say bye. No, say bye. No. Say it loud. Let's hear it from...
Bye. Come over by the computer. Bob can say it because we don't have the sound.
We're gonna be the peace we wanna see in the world. See in
The information in this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. It is not intended as medical advice. Always consult your healthcare professional for information on vaccines and infectious diseases.